The haunting melody of the cathedral organ seemed to echo from the very depths of my soul as I stood frozen at that marble altar, my trembling fingers clutching the delicate ivory silk of what was supposed to be the most beautiful dress of my life. 200 pairs of eyes bore into me like searchlights, each gaze carrying the weight of expectation, of tradition, of a future that was built on the most devastating lie imaginable. The morning sun streamed through those ancient stained glass windows that had witnessed countless love stories, countless promises, countless moments of pure joy. But today, those rainbow shadows dancing across the cathedral floor felt like a mockery of everything I had believed in. My heart wasn't racing with the breathless anticipation every bride dreams of. No, it was pounding with a rhythm that threatened to shatter my ribcage, the desperate drumbeat of betrayal, of rage, of a woman who had discovered that the two people she trusted most in this world had been orchestrating her destruction with surgical precision. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the signs that now seemed as obvious as neon lights in the darkness? Behind that sea of expectant faces, I could see my mother in the front pew, positioned like a queen at her own coronation. Her emerald dress wasn't just coordinated, it was calculated, chosen to complement the bouquet she had insisted I carry, chosen to photograph beautifully next to the son-in-law she had been secretly seducing for months. Diana Darren sat there with the practiced smile of a woman who had perfected the art of deception, her eyes glistening with what everyone assumed were tears of maternal pride. And God help me, 24 hours ago, I would have been fooled too. 24 hours ago, I still lived in that innocent world where mothers protected their daughters like lionesses, where love was sacred, where the people closest to you couldn't possibly be the architects of your humiliation. But that world had crumbled to ash the moment I opened her journal. Nathaniel's fingers tightened around mine, those same fingers that had traced promises across my skin, that had slipped an engagement ring onto my hand while whispering about forever. His blue eyes, once my safe harbor in every storm, now looked like the surface of a frozen lake. Beautiful, but concealing dangerous depths beneath. You ready for this, Celeste? His voice carried that same magnetic confidence that had first captured my heart 3 years ago in the Georgetown University Library. He had approached my table where I sat surrounded by towers of Victorian literature, introduced himself with a smile that could have powered half of Washington, D.C., and somehow convinced me to abandon my thesis research for coffee that turned into dinner, that turned into the most passionate love affair of my life. Or so I had believed. Now, looking into his face, that sharply defined jawline I had memorized with my fingertips, those lips that had whispered, "I love you," while planning my betrayal. I felt something crystallize inside my chest. It wasn't just heartbreak. It wasn't just rage. It was something far more powerful. Absolute, devastating clarity. "Oh, I'm ready," I whispered back, my voice steady as steel despite the earthquake happening beneath my ribs. More ready than you could possibly imagine. 3 months earlier, I had been living what everyone around me called a charmed life. My name is Celeste Marianne Darren, and at 28, I genuinely believed I had cracked the code to happiness. I was the daughter who had exceeded every expectation, the golden child who had never caused a moment's worry or disappointment. My academic achievements read like a parent's fever dream. Graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown University with a degree in English literature. My thesis on Victorian women writers, earning recognition from the Modern Language Association. By 25, I had landed my dream job as senior editor at Meridian Publishing, one of Washington, D.C.'s most prestigious literary houses. I spent my days discovering new voices, nurturing emerging talent, and shaping stories that would outlive all of us. And then there was Nathaniel Reed, the man who seemed custom-designed to complete my picture-perfect existence. At 31, he possessed the kind of devastating handsomeness that made strangers do double takes on the street. But it wasn't just his looks that had captured me. It was his brilliant mind, his wicked sense of humor, his ability to discuss everything from Supreme Court decisions to obscure poetry with equal passion. Nathaniel came from the kind of family that Washington, D.C. society pages dream about. His father, Judge Harrison Reed, commanded respect throughout the federal court system. His mother, Victoria Reed, was the epitome of philanthropic grace, her charity galas raising millions for causes from childhood literacy to domestic violence prevention. Nathaniel himself had followed the family tradition of public service, working as a corporate attorney at Whitman, Sterling Associates, the kind of white-shoe law firm where partnership meant joining the American aristocracy. Our love story had unfolded like something from the romance novels I occasionally edited. He had pursued me with a persistence that was flattering rather than overwhelming, showing up at my favorite coffee shop with perfectly timed coincidental encounters, sending thoughtful books to my office with handwritten notes about passages that reminded him of our conversations. The night he proposed still felt like a dream sequence when I replayed it in my memory. We were at the Kennedy Center, watching Swan Lake, my absolute favorite ballet. During intermission, as we sipped champagne in the grand foyer surrounded by Washington's cultural elite, he had suddenly dropped to one knee right there among the marble columns and crystal chandeliers. "Celeste Marianne Darren," he had said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly hushed crowd. "You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. You challenge me, inspire me, and make me want to be worthy of the love you've given me. Will you marry me?" The 2-carat diamond ring caught the chandelier light like captured starfire, but it was the expression in his eyes that had taken my breath away. Pure, undiluted adoration. At least, that's what I had seen, what I had chosen to see. "Yes," I had whispered. Then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." The spontaneous applause from strangers, the champagne toasts, the way he had swept me into his arms and spun me around like we were the only two people in the world. It had been everything a girl dreams her proposal will be. If I had been paying attention, really paying attention, I might have noticed that my mother's reaction to our engagement news was more about social positioning than maternal joy. "Oh, sweetheart, you're going to have such a beautiful life together," Diana had gushed that night as we sat in my parents' living room, my new engagement ring catching the lamplight with every gesture I made. But then she had added something that should have sent warning bells clanging through my head. "The Reeds are such a prominent family. You've done well for yourself." Not, "He makes you happy," or, "I can see how much he loves you." No, I had done well. As if marriage were a business transaction, a strategic alliance rather than a union of souls. My father, Pastor William Darren, had been characteristically more measured in his response, but equally pleased. Dad had built his reputation and his ministry on the bedrock of family values, traditional morals, and the sanctity of marriage. Seeing his only daughter unite with such a respected family felt like divine validation of everything he had preached for 3 decades. "Nathaniel is a good man," Dad had said that night, pulling me into one of his signature bear hugs that had been my safe place since childhood. "I can see how much he loves you, Celeste. And more importantly, I can see how much you love him." Love. That word that would later taste like poison on my tongue. The wedding planning that followed consumed the next 2 months like a beautiful, exhausting whirlwind. My mother threw herself into the preparations with an intensity that was both touching and overwhelming. She insisted on managing every single detail, from the shade of pink for the bridesmaids' dresses to the specific variety of roses in my bouquet. "This is every mother's dream," she would say, surrounded by wedding magazines, fabric samples, and endless vendor catalogs spread across our dining room table like battle plans. Planning her daughter's perfect wedding day. At first, I was genuinely touched by her involvement. Diana had always been a perfectionist, the kind of woman who planned my birthday parties 3 months in advance and color-coordinated our family Christmas cards. Having her take charge of wedding details meant I could focus on my increasingly demanding job at Meridian Publishing, where I was juggling 3 major book launches simultaneously. But as the weeks progressed, I began to notice something unsettling. Every suggestion I made was politely dismissed. Every preference I expressed was gently overruled. When I mentioned wanting wildflowers for my bouquet, something natural and organic that reflected my personality, she insisted that white roses and peonies would photograph better. "Trust me, darling," she would say with that indulgent smile that made me feel like a child playing dress-up. "Mother knows best." When I expressed interest in writing my own wedding vows, she convinced me that traditional vows were more elegant, more timeless. When I suggested a simple string quartet for the ceremony, she booked a full orchestra. When I wanted to serve my favorite comfort foods at the reception, she hired a catering company that specialized in what she called sophisticated cuisine. Looking back now, I can see the pattern that was invisible to me then. She wasn't planning my dream wedding. She was orchestrating her own fantasy, creating the perfect stage for her own performance. And Nathaniel seemed utterly charmed by it all. "Your mother is absolutely remarkable," he told me one evening as we walked through Meridian Hill Park, the same tree-lined path where he had first asked me to be his girlfriend. "She's so devoted to making everything perfect for us. You're incredibly lucky to have her." "She's always been like this," I had replied, squeezing his hand as we paused to watch the sunset paint the Washington Monument in shades of gold and pink. "When I was little, she would spend weeks preparing for my birthday parties. Every detail had to be absolutely flawless." "And I'm sure they always were," he had said, stopping to frame my face with his hands in that gesture that never failed to make my heart skip. "Just like you're perfect." Perfect, another word that would later make me nauseous. But in that moment, walking through the park with the man I adored, discussing our future with the kind of dreamy romanticism that feels possible only when you're genuinely, completely happy, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. I should have wondered why he spent so much time discussing my mother. I should have questioned the way his eyes would linger on her when she laughed, or how he always seemed to know exactly what wine to bring for dinner that would make her face light up with genuine delight. I should have been suspicious of how easily he had ingratiated himself into our family dynamics, how naturally he fit into conversations with my parents, how comfortable he seemed in our house even when I wasn't there. The first hairline fracture in my perfect world appeared 3 weeks before the wedding, on what should have been an ordinary Wednesday evening. I had stopped by my parents' house after work to finalize the seating arrangements, a task that had grown increasingly complex as distant relatives and family friends continued to RSVP at the last minute. My arms were full of response cards, my laptop bag heavy with manuscripts I needed to review that evening, and my mind was juggling the dozen fires that seemed to spontaneously combust whenever you were trying to plan a major life event while maintaining a demanding career. The house felt different the moment I walked through the front door. Usually, our colonial-style home buzzed with familiar energy, Dad's gospel music drifting from his study, Mom's cooking shows playing in the kitchen, the comfortable sounds of a couple who had shared the same space for 31 years. But today, the silence felt almost deliberate, calculated. "Mom? Dad?" I called, setting my bags down in the foyer and listening to my voice echo through empty rooms. "In the kitchen, sweetheart," came my mother's response. But there was something different about it. Breathless, almost flustered. Like she had been caught in the middle of something and was trying to compose herself. I found her standing at the sink with her back to me, washing dishes that looked suspiciously clean. Her usually perfect hair was mussed, dark strands escaping from her signature chignon in a way that was completely unlike her. When she turned around, her cheeks were flushed pink, and she couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Oh, Celeste, honey, I didn't expect you so early." "It's 6:30, I said, checking my watch. "Same time I always come on Wednesdays." Of course. She dried her hands on a dish towel with movements that seemed almost frantic. "Your father's at the church board meeting, budget planning for next quarter." Something felt fundamentally wrong, but I couldn't identify what. The kitchen looked exactly as it always did, every surface spotless, every decorative element perfectly positioned. But the air itself felt different. It smelled different. Not like my mother's usual vanilla candles, but like something else. Something masculine and expensive. "Was someone here?" I asked, settling at the kitchen island with the pile of RSVP cards. "What?" She spun around too quickly, water droplets from the dish towel scattering across the granite countertop. "Oh no, just me." But even as she spoke, my eyes caught something that made my stomach clench with inexplicable unease. On the counter sat a coffee mug from our good china, the Wedgwood set we only used for special occasions and important guests. It was still warm when I touched it. "Mom, whose mug is this?" Her shoulders went rigid. "Mine, of course. You only drink tea in the evenings." I was feeling tired, needed the caffeine." The lie sat between us like a live wire, sparking with dangerous electricity. My mother had many flaws: perfectionism, social anxiety, a tendency toward martyrdom, but dishonesty had never been one of them. She was constitutionally incapable of deception, her tells as readable as headlines, the way she avoided eye contact when uncomfortable, the slight tremor in her voice when stressed, the compulsive cleaning that always accompanied emotional turmoil. But I loved her. I trusted her. And when you love someone, you give them the benefit of the doubt even when doubt is the more rational response. "Okay," I said simply, opening the first RSVP card. "Let's figure out these seating arrangements." The evening proceeded normally on the surface. We discussed which relatives couldn't be seated together due to decades-old feuds, debated whether Nathaniel's law school friends should be at the same table as my college roommates, and argued about whether children should be relegated to a separate area or integrated with their parents. But underneath the normal conversation, something fundamental had shifted. I caught my mother glancing at her phone constantly, her fingers tapping anxiously against the counter in a rhythm that spoke of barely contained nervous energy. When Nathaniel texted me around 8 to say he was working late on a complex merger and would see me tomorrow, I noticed the way her entire body seemed to relax, as if someone had released a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. That night, I lay in my apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the evening and trying to identify the source of my unease. It was probably nothing. Pre-wedding stress, the natural anxiety that comes with planning a major life event. But sleep eluded me, and I found myself thinking about that coffee mug, still warm, sitting on the counter like evidence of something I couldn't name. The second crack appeared exactly 1 week later, and this time, there was no mistaking the wrongness of what I discovered. Nathaniel had been increasingly distant, claiming that a high-profile corporate merger was consuming 18-hour days and destroying his sleep schedule. Our usual Thursday night dinners had been canceled twice in a row, and he'd missed our cake tasting appointment with the bakery where we were supposed to finalize dessert selections for the reception. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he had said during a hurried phone call that afternoon, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone genuinely overwhelmed by work. "This Hartwell Industries deal is a complete nightmare. The partners are breathing down everyone's necks, and I'm basically living at the office." When I called his law firm that evening around 7, hoping to surprise him with takeout from his favorite Thai restaurant, his secretary informed me that Mr. Reed had left the building at 4:30. "Are you sure?" I had asked, certain there must be some mistake. "He said he'd be working late tonight." "I'm positive," she replied. "I saw him leave myself. He seemed to be in quite a hurry." So I drove to his apartment in Georgetown, a sleek, high-rise building with a doorman who had known me by name for over 2 years. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal, each floor I passed amplifying the sick feeling growing in my stomach. I knocked on his door first, giving him the opportunity to explain why he had lied about working late. When there was no answer, I used the key he had given me 6 months earlier, a gesture that had felt like the ultimate symbol of trust and commitment. "Nathaniel, are you okay?" I called as I stepped into the apartment we had already begun discussing redecorating after our honeymoon. The living room was dim, lit only by the city lights streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the Potomac River. But the apartment wasn't empty. There was a wine glass on the coffee table, just one, which was odd since Nathaniel never drank alone. And there was lipstick on the rim, a deep red shade that I didn't recognize, in a color I had never worn. "Nathaniel?" I tried again, walking toward his bedroom, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors with sounds that seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "I'm here." His voice came through the closed bedroom door, muffled and strange. I'm not feeling well, Celeste. Food poisoning, I think." I reached for the door handle, prepared to rush to his aid despite his protests. But the door was locked. That stopped me cold. In 3 years together, through countless nights I had spent in his apartment, Nathaniel had never locked his bedroom door. Not once. "Let me take care of you," I said, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. No, I don't want you to catch anything. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" I stood there for a long moment, staring at that locked door, my mind racing through possible explanations. Food poisoning was certainly plausible. Maybe he was embarrassed about being violently ill. Maybe he didn't want me to see him at his worst. But that wine glass with lipstick haunted me. And his voice had sounded wrong. Not sick, but careful. Like he was choosing his words very deliberately. "Feel better," I said finally. "I love you." "Love you too." The words came a beat too late, like an afterthought rather than an instinct. I let myself out of his apartment and sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at the concrete walls and trying to process what I had just experienced. There were innocent explanations for everything I had seen. The wine glass could have been from yesterday, left over from a work colleague who had stopped by to discuss the merger. The lipstick could have been from his secretary or a female partner at the firm. But innocent explanations require trust. And for the first time in our relationship, trust was becoming harder to summon than suspicion. 2 days before my wedding, the truth came crashing down like an avalanche that buried everything I thought I knew about my life. I was at my office, attempting to focus on a manuscript about medieval poetry. But my concentration kept fracturing. The conversation with the florist that morning had devolved into an argument about peonies versus garden roses. The final dress fitting had revealed that I'd lost 8 pounds from stress and would need emergency alterations. And Nathaniel had been unreachable for most of the day, his phone going straight to voicemail. When my mother called around noon, I welcomed the distraction. "Celeste, darling, I need a tiny favor," she said, her voice carrying that particular breathless quality that meant she was juggling multiple tasks while talking. "Of course. What's wrong?" "I left some wedding programs in my car, and I'm having lunch with Mrs. Chen from the flower committee. Could you swing by the house and grab them? They're in my Mercedes, in a manila envelope on the passenger seat." "Sure, no problem." The drive to my parents' house took 25 minutes through Washington, D.C.'s perpetually congested traffic. I used my key to get through the front gate and parked behind my mother's pearl-white Mercedes, the car she had insisted on buying despite my father's protests about the expense. The Mercedes was unlocked, which was typical for our safe, suburban neighborhood, where most residents had known each other for decades. I opened the passenger door and immediately spotted the manila envelope filled with wedding programs, each one carefully designed with our names and wedding date in elegant script. But as I reached for the envelope, something else caught my eye. A small black leather notebook had slipped between the seats, partially hidden, but with my name written on the cover in my mother's familiar handwriting. Celeste, it read, in the same careful script she had used to label my school notebooks throughout my childhood. I wouldn't have thought anything of it. My mother was always jotting down notes, ideas, reminders to herself. But finding it in her car with my name on it, 2 days before my wedding, seemed significant. Maybe it contained notes about the ceremony, or thoughts she wanted to share with me, or wedding day wisdom she had been preparing. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The first page was dated 3 months ago, just days after Nathaniel had proposed. Nathaniel Reed is everything I should have married. Handsome, successful, from the right family. Instead, I settled for William and his middle-class ministry. But maybe it's not too late. Maybe I deserve something beautiful for once. The notebook slipped from my fingers like it was made of fire. I sat there in the driver's seat of my mother's car, staring at her handwriting while my entire world tilted sideways on its axis. With trembling hands, I picked up the notebook and continued reading. He looks at me the way William used to, before the years and routine wore him down. When Nathaniel compliments my dress or my cooking, I remember what it felt like to be desired. Today, he stayed after Celeste left for work. We talked for hours about literature and travel. He said I was wasted on small-town life. He's right. Page after page, entry after entry. My mother's careful handwriting documenting the slow, deliberate seduction of my fiancé. Each word was a knife, each sentence a betrayal so profound it felt like physical violence. I know this is wrong. I know what it would do to Celeste if she found out. But when was the last time anyone chose me? Really chose me. Not out of duty or convention, but out of want. He kissed me today. God help me. I kissed him back. We made love in his apartment while Celeste was at her book club. He said I was more passionate than any woman he'd ever been with. I felt alive again. Nathaniel says after the wedding we'll find a way to be together. He says marrying Celeste is just what's expected of him, but his heart belongs to me now. The final entry was dated yesterday. Tomorrow night, the night before the wedding, he's coming over while William is at his bachelor party planning meeting. Our last time together before Celeste becomes his wife. After that, we'll have to be more careful, but we've come too far to stop now. I closed the notebook and sat in perfect stillness while normal life continued around me. Sprinklers watering manicured lawns, children riding bicycles with playing cards, clothes pinned to the spokes, dogs barking at mail carriers. Suburban afternoon routine happening while my entire universe collapsed into a black hole of betrayal. How long? The question echoed in my head like a broken record. How long had they been laughing at me behind my back? How long had I been the unwitting star of their elaborate deception? I thought about every dinner where they had sat across from each other, making polite conversation while sharing secret glances I had been too trusting to interpret correctly. I thought about every family gathering where they had exchanged looks I had dismissed as simple friendliness. I thought about all the ways I had been manipulated, gaslit, and systematically betrayed by the two people who were supposed to love me most in the world. And that's when the tears finally came. Hot, angry tears that tasted like salt and fury and the death of innocence. I cried until my chest ached, until my mascara ran in dark streams down my cheeks, until there was nothing left inside me but a cold, crystalline clarity. They had chosen each other over me. Now I would choose myself over them. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into the Willard Intercontinental under a false name, paying cash and spinning a story to the desk clerk about surprising my husband for our anniversary. The lie came easily. Apparently, I was learning to be as skilled at deception as my mother and fiancé. In my hotel room, I spread everything out on the king-sized bed like a detective organizing evidence at a crime scene. My mother's journal, screenshots of Nathaniel's recent credit card statements. We had combined our accounts for wedding expenses, and a growing list of all the signs I had missed or rationalized away. the expensive cologne scent in my parents' kitchen that evening 3 weeks ago, the lipstick on the wine glass in Nathaniel's apartment, his sudden expertise in my mother's favorite wines and her preferred conversation topics, the way they had both been so insistent about traditional wedding vows, probably because they knew I might say something in personal vows that would expose their guilt. I ordered room service and sat cross-legged on the bed, eating overpriced pasta while I planned their destruction with the methodical precision of a general preparing for battle. The old Celeste would have confronted them privately. She would have cried and demanded explanations, and probably would have ended up being manipulated into forgiveness or silence. The old Celeste believed in second chances, in the power of love to overcome betrayal, in handling family problems behind closed doors. But the old Celeste was dead. She had died reading her mother's journal in the front seat of a Mercedes while her world collapsed around her. The new Celeste understood that some betrayals were too profound for private resolution. This wasn't just about a cheating fiancé or an unfaithful mother. This was about two people who had conspired to make me complicit in my own humiliation, who had planned to continue their affair after my wedding, who had stolen not just my happiness, but my dignity, my trust, and my faith in human decency. They wanted to play games? Fine. I had learned from masters of manipulation. My first call was to my assistant at Meridian Publishing. "Jenna, I need you to do me a favor. Can you compile a complete guest list for everyone coming to my wedding tomorrow? Email addresses, phone numbers, social media handles, everything we have." "Of course," she said, though I could hear the confusion in her voice. "Is everything okay? You sound—" "Everything's perfect," I said, and for the first time in days, I meant it. "I just want to make sure everyone has all the information they need for tomorrow." Next, I called my college roommate Priya, who worked as a freelance journalist in New York. "Celeste, oh my God, your wedding is tomorrow. Are you freaking out? I am so excited for you." "Priya, I need a favor, and I need you not to ask questions." Her voice immediately grew cautious. "Okay. What kind of favor?" "I need you to be at St. Michael's Cathedral tomorrow morning with your camera and your press credentials. Something newsworthy is going to happen and I want it documented." "Celeste, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I'm not the one who should be scared." The final call was the hardest. I dialed my father's number, knowing he would be returning home from his bachelor party planning meeting at the church. "Celeste, sweetheart, you shouldn't be calling me. Isn't it bad luck for the father of the bride to talk to his daughter the night before the wedding?" His voice was warm with the gentle humor that had been the soundtrack of my childhood. "Dad," I said, and my voice broke just slightly. "I love you. No matter what happens tomorrow, I need you to remember that I love you and that none of this is your fault." "Honey, you're worrying me. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, Dad. Everything is finally going to be right." After I hung up, I sat in the hotel room silence for a long time, thinking about justice and revenge and the sometimes razor-thin difference between the two. Revenge was about causing pain for the satisfaction of watching someone suffer. Justice was about revealing truth and allowing consequences to follow naturally. Tomorrow, I would serve justice with a smile. Before we continue with this incredible story of betrayal and ultimate revenge, let me know in the comments which country you're watching from. We love connecting with our global family and hearing from viewers around the world. And if this is your first time on our channel, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring you even more compelling stories of justice, revenge, and people who refuse to stay silent. Now, let's see how Celeste's perfect plan unfolds. I woke at dawn and ordered coffee from room service, sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows in my hotel bathrobe while the sun painted Washington, D.C. in shades of gold and rose. In 6 hours, I was supposed to become Mrs. Nathaniel Reed. Instead, I was about to become something far more powerful, a woman who refused to be anyone's fool. My phone had been buzzing all morning with texts from my mother. Each message a masterpiece of manipulation disguised as maternal love. Good morning, beautiful bride. I hope you slept well. I can't wait to see you walk down that aisle today. The flowers arrived and they're absolutely perfect. The musicians are setting up now and I just confirmed final details with the photographer. Everything is exactly as it should be. I love you so much, sweetheart. Today is going to be the most beautiful day of your life. Each message felt like a knife wrapped in silk ribbon, pretty on the surface but designed to cut deep. The audacity was breathtaking. Here was a woman who had spent 3 months systematically betraying her own daughter, and she was still performing the role of devoted mother with Academy Award-worthy conviction. At 9, I took a long, hot shower, letting the steam and heat wash away the last traces of the woman I used to be. When I stepped out, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked, maybe for the first time in months. My dark hair, so much like my mother's that people often mistook us for sisters. My blue eyes, inherited directly from my father along with his stubborn streak and his unshakable moral compass. My face, which had always been called pretty but never remarkable. Today, I would be remarkable. I drove to the cathedral slowly, taking the scenic route through downtown D.C., past the monuments and memorials that represented the ideals this city was supposed to embody: truth, justice, honor. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect weather for what everyone expected to be a perfect wedding. St. Michael's Cathedral looked magnificent in the morning light, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like prayers made of stone and stained glass. Cars were already arriving in the parking lot, early guests, vendors, family members getting ready for what they believed would be a celebration of love and commitment. I parked and sat for a moment, watching people I had known my entire life bustle around in preparation for my special day. Mrs. Chen from the Flower Committee, directing the placement of elaborate arrangements with military precision. Mr. Rodriguez, who had been our neighbor for 20 years, adjusting his tie and checking his watch. Nathaniel's law school friends, laughing and smoking cigarettes behind the building like they were still 22 instead of successful professionals. All these people who cared about me, who had taken time out of their Saturday morning to witness what they believed would be the beginning of my happily ever after. They deserved to know the truth, too. I gathered my wedding dress, shoes, and makeup bag and walked through the side entrance that led to the bridal preparation room. The small space was already buzzing with activity that felt surreal given what I knew was coming. My matron of honor, Kathleen, was hanging up her dusty rose dress and arranging flowers in a crystal vase. My 2 bridesmaids were setting up a makeshift coffee station and laying out enough beauty products to stock a small salon. "Celeste!" Kathleen rushed over to embrace me, her face glowing with excitement. "Oh my God, you're absolutely radiant. How are you feeling?" "Like today is going to change everything," I said, and it was perhaps the most honest thing I had said in weeks. "Where's your mother? I thought she'd be here by now, supervising every detail." I checked my phone. No new messages from Diana since her sickeningly sweet good morning texts. "She'll be here," I said. What I didn't say was that I knew exactly where my mother was at that moment, because I had been tracking Nathaniel's phone location since the previous evening using our shared family plan. He had spent the night at my parents' house, leaving at 6:30 that morning, probably to avoid being seen by neighbors who might wonder why the groom was emerging from his future mother-in-law's bedroom hours before his wedding. One last betrayal for old time's sake. As my bridesmaids helped me into my dress, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me like armor. The ivory silk slipped over my skin with whispered promises, and when they began fastening the dozens of tiny pearl buttons up my back, I felt myself transforming into someone new, someone stronger. The dress had been my mother's choice, of course, a traditional A-line gown with long sleeves, a cathedral train, and enough intricate beadwork to rival the night sky. I had wanted something simpler, more modern. but Diana had insisted with the kind of maternal authority that had shaped my entire life. "This dress will photograph beautifully," she had said during our final fitting, her hands smoothing invisible wrinkles with the possessive touch of a woman arranging her masterpiece. "Classic elegance never goes out of style, darling." Now I understood why she had been so invested in how I looked. She needed me to appear perfect for the photographs that would document her son-in-law's public humiliation. Even in her betrayal, she was still directing the performance. Kathleen secured my veil, the same fingertip-length veil my grandmother had worn in 1952, with pearl-tipped pins that caught the morning light streaming through the preparation room's stained glass window. "You look absolutely stunning, Celeste," she whispered, her eyes growing misty. "Nathaniel is going to lose his mind when he sees you walking down that aisle." "I certainly hope so," I murmured, checking my reflection one final time. At 11:30, the photographer arrived to capture what he assumed were pre-ceremony portraits of bridal joy. I smiled and posed, letting him document what were actually images of a woman preparing for war. Every shot was perfect, my expression serene, my posture confident, my eyes bright with what looked like happiness, but was actually anticipation. At 11:45, my father appeared in the doorway of the bridal room, and for a moment, my carefully constructed composure almost cracked. "Hello, beautiful girl." Dad stood there in his formal black tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled, looking every inch the proud father of the bride. At 58, Pastor William Darren was still a handsome man, tall, dignified, with the kind of genuine warmth that had made him beloved by our congregation for 3 decades. He was also a man whose world was about to implode, and the knowledge of what I was about to put him through made my chest tighten with guilt and love in equal measure. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can hardly believe my little girl is getting married." The bridesmaids and photographer tactfully stepped aside to give us privacy, but I could feel their curiosity like electricity in the air. I took my father's hands, those strong, gentle hands that had blessed countless couples, that had held me when I fell off my bicycle as a child, that had taught me to drive and to pray and to believe in the fundamental goodness of people. "Dad, I need to tell you something before we walk down that aisle." His brow furrowed with immediate concern. "Of course, honey. What is it?" I pulled my mother's journal from my bridal bag and placed it in his hands like I was handing him a lit bomb. "I found this in Mom's car yesterday." He looked confused as he opened the leather cover, but I watched his face change as he began to read. The color drained from his cheeks like someone had opened a valve. His lips parted slightly and his hands began to tremble. "Celeste." His voice was barely a whisper. "This can't be real. Your mother would never." "Read the dates, Dad. Read all of it." He sank into the small velvet chair beside the vanity, still clutching the journal, his eyes scanning page after page of his wife's documented betrayal. I knelt beside him, my wedding dress pooling around us like spilled cream, and waited for the full weight of 31 years of marriage to collapse on his shoulders. "How long have you known?" he asked finally, his voice hollow. "Since yesterday afternoon. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." He looked up at me, this man who had built his entire ministry on the sanctity of marriage and family values, and I saw something fundamental break behind his eyes. Not just heartbreak, though that was there too, but the shattering of every foundation he had built his life upon. "What are we going to do?" he whispered. "We're going to walk down that aisle," I said firmly. "We're going to let everyone see exactly who Diana Darren and Nathaniel Reed really are. Celeste, no. Think about this carefully. The scandal, the humiliation, our reputation in the community. The humiliation isn't ours to carry, Dad. It's theirs." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him grappling with 30 years of conditioning that said family problems should be handled privately, quietly, behind closed doors, where reputations could be preserved and appearances maintained. "There are 200 people out there," he said desperately. 200 people who love us and deserve to know the truth before they witness what they think is a sacred ceremony. Your reputation, my reputation will be that I refuse to be made a fool of, that I chose dignity over silence. A sharp knock at the door interrupted us. 5 minutes, everyone," called the wedding coordinator, her voice bright with the kind of professional cheerfulness that comes from orchestrating other people's happiest moments. Dad stood up slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might collapse right there on the preparation room floor. But then he straightened his shoulders, adjusted his tie, and looked at me with something that might have been pride. "You're braver than I ever was," he said quietly. "I learned from the best." He offered me his arm, and together we walked toward the sanctuary doors. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see the cathedral filled to capacity with guests, friends and family members who had traveled from across the country to celebrate with us. The altar was decorated exactly as my mother had envisioned, white roses and peonies arranged in towering displays that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The string quartet, no, the full orchestra she had insisted upon, was playing Pachelbel's canon, filling the sacred space with soaring melody that should have made my heart race with joy. Nathaniel stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the successful attorney and devoted bridegroom. His best man and groomsmen flanked him, all of them smiling in anticipation of the beautiful ceremony they were about to witness. In the front row, my mother sat like a queen holding court. Her emerald dress, carefully chosen to complement my bouquet and the altar decorations, caught the light streaming through stained glass windows. She looked like every mother of the bride should look, proud, elegant, overcome with emotion at her daughter's happiness. She was even dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, the picture of maternal devotion. What incredible actors they both were, I thought, as the wedding coordinator reached for the door handles. They should have been on Broadway instead of destroying my life. "Ready?" Dad whispered, his voice barely audible over the swelling music. I squeezed his arm. "Ready." The sanctuary doors opened, and the processional music began with the kind of grandeur that makes even cynics believe in fairy tales. My bridesmaids walked down the aisle in their dusty rose dresses, smiling at guests and taking their places at the altar, with the practiced grace of women who had rehearsed this moment to perfection. Then the music swelled into the traditional bridal march, and every person in that cathedral rose to their feet. 200 faces turned toward me with expressions of joy, anticipation, and love. Cameras flashed like tiny stars. People whispered about how beautiful I looked, how perfect everything was, how lucky Nathaniel was to be marrying such a wonderful girl. We stepped into the sanctuary, and I felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes like physical pressure against my skin. This was it, the moment every little girl dreams about, walking down the aisle toward her Prince Charming while everyone she loves watches with tears in their eyes. Nathaniel's face lit up when he saw me, his blue eyes warm with what looked like genuine adoration. For just a moment, seeing him there in his tuxedo with that devastating smile that had first captured my heart, I almost understood how my mother had fallen under his spell. He was beautiful in the way that makes smart women do stupid things. My mother pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, the perfect image of a mother overwhelmed by the beauty of her daughter's wedding day. If I hadn't read her journal, if I didn't know about their months of secret meetings and stolen kisses, I would have been moved by her tears. Instead, I felt nothing but cold, crystalline clarity. We reached the altar, and Dad placed my hand in Nathaniel's with the ceremonial gesture that was supposed to symbolize one man giving his daughter to another. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. My father was literally handing me over to the man who had been betraying me with my own mother. "Dearly beloved," began Pastor Jenkins, his voice carrying easily through the cathedral's sound system. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Nathaniel William Reed and Celeste Marianne Darren in holy matrimony. I let him speak, following along with the traditional ceremony I had heard dozens of times throughout my childhood. The familiar words about love and commitment and the sanctity of marriage felt like a foreign language now. Meaningless sounds that had nothing to do with the reality of my situation. Nathaniel squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back. In the front row, my mother watched with glowing pride, occasionally dabbing at her eyes for effect. They had no idea what was coming. They felt safe, protected by the assumption that I was still the same trusting, naive woman who had believed their lies for 3 months. Marriage, Pastor Jenkins continued, is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. How appropriate, I thought. Let's talk about reverence and God's purposes. If there is anyone present who has just cause why these two should not be joined in marriage, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. This was the moment. The traditional pause where someone could object, where secrets could be revealed, where truth could interrupt the proceedings. I could have spoken then, could have laid out their betrayal for everyone to hear in that perfect, dramatic moment. Instead, I remained silent. I let Pastor Jenkins continue through the traditional vows, the ring exchange, all the sacred rituals that should have been the foundation of a lifetime of happiness. I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted them to think they had gotten away with it. I wanted their guards completely down when I finally struck. "Nathaniel," Pastor Jenkins said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of tradition, "do you take Celeste to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, until death do you part?" Nathaniel looked into my eyes, his voice strong and clear and completely convincing. "I do." A pause. Then he added with what sounded like sincere emotion, "Forsaking all others." The lie was so brazen, so audacious, that I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. Here was a man who had been sleeping with my mother as recently as last night, promising to forsake all others with the kind of conviction that would have fooled everyone in that cathedral. Everyone except me. "Celeste," Pastor Jenkins continued, "do you take Nathaniel to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, until death do you part?" This was my moment, the moment to say, "I do," and become complicit in my own deception, or the moment to burn their world down with the truth they had been so careful to hide. I looked out at the congregation. All these faces filled with expectation and joy, people who had known me since I was a child, who had watched me grow up in this very church, who believed they were witnessing the happiest moment of my life. I looked at my father in the front row, his eyes encouraging me to be strong, to do what I knew was right, even if it was the hardest thing I had ever done. I looked at my mother, still dabbing at her eyes with theatrical precision, still performing the role of devoted mother even as she sat there knowing she had been betraying me for months. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral sound system, "I have something to say first." The cathedral fell into perfect, absolute silence. Even the musicians stopped playing. 200 people held their breath, waiting to see what the bride could possibly need to say that couldn't wait until after the ceremony. Nathaniel's hand tightened on mine, his perfect smile faltering just slightly. "Celeste," he said quietly, his lawyer's instincts sensing danger. "What are you doing?" I pulled my hand free and stepped away from him, moving closer to the microphone so everyone could hear every word clearly. "I just realized," I began, my voice steady and strong, "that before I make the biggest promise of my life, I should probably be completely honest about everything." Murmurs began to ripple through the congregation like stones thrown into still water. I could see confusion replacing celebration in their expressions, curiosity mixed with the first stirrings of concern. In the front row, my mother had gone very still, her handkerchief forgotten in her lap, her face suddenly pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," I continued, turning to face the congregation fully. "It means everything to me that you would take time out of your lives to witness what you thought would be the beginning of my happily ever after." "Celeste!" Nathaniel reached for me, but I stepped further away, putting distance between us that felt symbolic of so much more than physical space. "But I've learned recently that happy endings have to be built on truth, not on beautiful lies. And there's something you all need to know before the ceremony continues." The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. 200 people waited, some leaning forward in their seats, others exchanging worried glances with their spouses or friends. "Yesterday, I discovered that my fiancé and my mother have been having an affair." The words hit the cathedral like a physical explosion. Gasps echoed off the stone walls. Someone dropped their program, the sound sharp in the sudden chaos. I heard a woman somewhere behind me whisper, "Oh my God," in a voice thick with shock. In the front row, I watched Judge Reed's face go white as he stared at his son with an expression of horror and disbelief. Victoria Reed, Nathaniel's mother, simply sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, looking like someone had just told her the world was ending. "I found my mother's journal," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, feeding off the energy of finally telling the truth. 3 months of detailed entries about their relationship. 3 months of secret meetings, lies, and betrayals. 3 months of them laughing at how easily they could deceive me. My mother stood up abruptly, her face flushed red with embarrassment and panic. "Celeste, stop this nonsense right now. You're being—" "Sit down, Diana." The sharp command came from my father, who had also risen from his seat. His voice carried the authority of 30 years of ministry, and my mother sank back into her pew as if she had been physically struck. "Is it nonsense that you spent last night at my parents' house?" I asked Nathaniel, raising my voice so everyone could hear. "While my father was at his meeting planning your bachelor party?" The cathedral erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. I could see people turning to their neighbors, sharing looks of disbelief and scandal. This was the kind of drama that would be talked about for years, the wedding that became legend for all the wrong reasons. Nathaniel's face had gone completely white. He looked around the cathedral wildly, seeing his reputation, his career, his entire carefully constructed life crumbling in real time. "Is it nonsense that you've been using our joint credit card to buy expensive wine for my mother?" I continued relentlessly. "Wine that she specifically mentioned loving in her journal entries about your affair?" Judge Reed was standing now, staring at his son with a mixture of horror and rage that transformed his usually dignified features into something terrible to behold. "Nathaniel," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, "tell me this isn't true." Nathaniel looked around the cathedral desperately, searching for some way to salvage the situation, some argument that could explain away the impossible. He was a lawyer, trained to think on his feet, to find loopholes and technicalities that could save his clients from disaster. But there was no legal argument for betraying your fiancée with her own mother. I can explain," he stammered. But even as he said it, we all knew he couldn't. "Oh, please do explain," I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. "Explain to your father, to your colleagues, to everyone who believed you were a man of honor, how you seduced your fiancé's mother. Explain how you planned to marry me while continuing your affair with her." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in that cathedral was staring at Nathaniel, waiting for his explanation, and he had nothing. No smooth attorney arguments, no charming deflections that had gotten him out of trouble his entire privileged life. Just the truth, finally exposed in all its ugly reality. In the front row, my mother was weeping. Not the delicate tears of a proud mother, but harsh, ugly sobs of a woman whose life had just imploded in the most public way possible. "Celeste," she choked out between sobs, "please, you don't understand. I never meant for—" "I understand perfectly," I said, turning to face her with all the cold fury I had been suppressing for 24 hours. "I understand that you decided your daughter's happiness was a fair price to pay for feeling desired again. I understand that you looked at my fiancé and decided you deserved him more than I did." "That's not— I never meant—" "You never meant to get caught." The truth of it hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had finally burned out of control. My mother crumpled back into her seat, her emerald dress now looking gaudy and desperate instead of elegant, her perfect makeup running in dark streams down her cheeks. I looked out at the congregation one final time. Family, friends, colleagues, people who had watched me grow up, who had believed they were witnessing my fairy tale ending. "I want you all to know," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral, "that this isn't about revenge. This is about truth. This is about refusing to build a life on someone else's lies. And this is about choosing myself over people who chose each other over me." With that, I began walking down the aisle, my cathedral train sweeping behind me like a queen's robe. As I passed the front row, I stopped in front of my father. "Dad, I'm sorry you had to learn this way, but I'm not sorry that you learned it." He nodded, tears streaming down his face, but his eyes were filled with something that looked like pride mixed with profound sadness. "I love you, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking. "You did the right thing." I kissed his forehead, tasting salt and sorrow and the end of one life and the beginning of another. Then I continued down the aisle, my head held high, my wedding dress flowing behind me like a river of ivory silk. Behind me, chaos was erupting. Nathaniel desperately trying to explain himself to his furious father, guests standing and whispering and pointing, my mother sobbing into her hands while Mrs. Chen from the flower committee stared at her with undisguised disgust. But I didn't look back. I walked through those cathedral doors with my dignity intact, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 lives that had been built on lies and betrayal. The parking lot behind St. Michael's Cathedral became my sanctuary. I stood beside my car in the crisp October air, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in months. The sounds of chaos drifted through the heavy wooden doors, raised voices, crying, the scraping of chairs as people stood and moved and tried to process what they had just witnessed. My phone was already buzzing with calls and texts, but I ignored them all except one. "Priya? Holy shit, Celeste. Holy actual shit. Did you really just— did that really happen? Did you get it all? Every single second. My editor is going to lose his mind when he sees this footage. This is going to be everywhere by tonight." "Good. Are you okay? Really okay? Because that was incredible and terrifying, and I don't even know what to call it." I considered the question, standing there in my wedding dress in an empty parking lot, having just destroyed 2 lives and possibly my own reputation in the most public way possible. "I'm perfect," I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it completely. Within 1 hour, the story was spreading through our social circles like wildfire. Within 3 hours, it was on local news websites with headlines like "Wedding Day Bombshell" and "Bride Exposes Affair at Altar." Within 6 hours, "Wedding Revenge" was trending on social media as people shared Priya's video and dissected every moment of my cathedral confrontation. The reactions were everything I had hoped for, and more. Judge Reed issued a statement through his law firm that afternoon, announcing that his son was taking indefinite leave to address personal matters. Translation: Nathaniel's career was effectively over. No respectable law firm in Washington, D.C. would touch him after this kind of scandal. Victoria Reed, Nathaniel's mother, sent me a handwritten letter that arrived by courier that same evening. "Dear Celeste, I cannot begin to express my horror at my son's behavior or my admiration for your courage today. You deserved so much better than this betrayal. Please know that you will always have my respect and support. With deepest regrets, Victoria. The congregation of St. Michael's rallied around my father in a way that brought tears to my eyes. By Sunday evening, over 100 people had called or stopped by to express their support and their disgust at what had been done to our family. But the most satisfying response came from my mother's social circle, the women she had spent years trying to impress with her perfect marriage and perfect daughter and perfect life. Within 24 hours, she had been quietly asked to step down from her positions on 3 different charity boards. Her lunch invitations dried up overnight. Her phone stopped ringing except for reporters trying to get her side of the story. Diana Darren, who had built her entire identity around being the perfect pastor's wife, suddenly found herself the subject of whispered conversations and shocked stares wherever she went. She tried to call me dozens of times that first day. I let every call go to voicemail and eventually stopped listening to her increasingly desperate messages. 3 days after my non-wedding, I sat in my father's study watching him pack boxes filled with 30 years' worth of theological books and sermon notes. The room that had been his sanctuary, his place of prayer and preparation, now looked hollow and temporary. "You don't have to resign," I said for the 10th time. "The congregation supports you. They know this wasn't your fault." "Yes, I do," he replied, his voice tired but resolute. "I can't preach about the sanctity of marriage when my own wife made a mockery of it in front of the entire community. The congregation deserves better." Dad had aged what looked like years in just 72 hours. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders more stooped, but there was something peaceful about him too, like a man who had been carrying a weight he didn't know was there until it was finally lifted. "What will you do?" I asked, carefully wrapping his favorite coffee mug in newspaper. "I've been offered a position at a small church in Vermont. Interim pastor while they search for someone permanent. It'll give me time to figure out what comes next." Through the window, I could see Diana loading suitcases into her car. She was moving in with her sister in Baltimore, the only family member who would still speak to her. "Have you talked to her at all?" His face hardened. "Once. To tell her I'd filed for divorce." The word hung in the air between us like something fragile and broken. Divorce. In our family, in our faith tradition, that word had been unthinkable. My parents had been married for 31 years, had built their entire lives around the concept of "until death do us part." "I'm sorry, Dad." "Don't be. You saved me from living a lie for the rest of my life." He taped up another box with methodical precision. I would have gone to my grave never knowing who I was really married to. A knock at the front door interrupted us. Dad went to answer it while I continued packing his theological commentaries. Books that had helped him counsel hundreds of couples through the years, books about love and commitment and forgiveness that now felt like artifacts from a more innocent time. "Celeste," Dad appeared in the doorway with Judge Reed behind him. Harrison Reed looked like he had aged as much as my father. His usually immaculate appearance was rumpled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and shame. "Judge Reed," I said, standing up and smoothing my jeans. "I'm surprised to see you." "I needed to apologize," he said simply. "For my son. For what he put you through. For what he put both our families through." I studied his face, looking for signs of blame or resentment toward me for destroying his son's life so publicly, but found only genuine remorse. "Thank you, but you're not responsible for Nathaniel's choices." "Aren't I?" His laugh was bitter and self-recriminating. "I raised him to believe he was entitled to whatever he wanted, that his charm and good looks would get him out of any trouble. I created the man who betrayed you." "No," I said firmly. "You raised a son. He chose to become a man without honor. That's on him, not you." Judge Reed nodded slowly, as if he was trying to convince himself of the truth in my words. Victoria and I are seeking counseling, he said, trying to figure out where we went wrong, how we failed him so completely. Don't let his failures define your marriage, I said. Some people are just broken inside in ways that have nothing to do with how they were raised. It doesn't mean everyone who loved them is broken too. He studied me for a long moment with something like wonder in his eyes. You're remarkable, you know that? Most people would be destroyed by what happened to you. Instead, you're offering wisdom to a foolish old man. I learned from the best, I said, glancing at my father. After Judge Reed left, Dad and I finished packing in comfortable silence. As the sun began to set, painting his study in shades of gold and amber, he sealed the last box and looked around the room that had been his sanctuary for over a decade. Any regrets? I asked. He paused, considering the question carefully. About the divorce? About leaving the church? About watching my daughter destroy 2 people in front of 200 witnesses? A pause. No, not one. My only regret is not raising a daughter brave enough to choose truth over comfort sooner. But then again, maybe the timing was perfect. Maybe you needed to be exactly who you were at exactly that moment. 6 months later, I stood in the gardens behind my new apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, watching spring emerge from winter's grip with the kind of stubborn beauty that makes you believe in second chances. Cherry blossoms dotted the landscape like pink confetti, and the air smelled of fresh grass and infinite possibility. My phone rang with Dad's weekly check-in call, a tradition we had maintained religiously since he moved to Vermont. "How's the Green Mountain State treating you?" I asked without preamble. "Beautiful. Peaceful. The congregation here is small but genuine. No politics, no drama, just faith and community in its purest form. Are you happy?" "I'm getting there. What about you? How's the new job?" 3 months earlier, I had been offered a position as senior editor at Blackstone Literary, a prestigious publishing house in New York City. The salary was substantial, the work challenging and fulfilling, and best of all, it was 300 miles away from the wreckage of my old life. "I love it," I said honestly. "The city, the work, the complete anonymity. I can walk down the street and just be Celeste, not that woman from the wedding video." "Good. You deserve a fresh start." The wedding video had eventually faded from viral status, replaced by newer scandals and fresher drama as the internet's attention span moved on to other stories. But for several weeks, I had been something of a folk hero, the woman who chose dignity over silence, truth over comfort, herself over the people who had betrayed her. The attention had been overwhelming, but ultimately empowering. I had received thousands of messages from women sharing their own stories of betrayal and thanking me for showing them that it was possible to choose themselves, even when choosing themselves meant standing alone. "Have you heard from her?" Dad asked, as he did every week. "No." And I hadn't. Diana had tried reaching out through intermediaries, my aunt, old family friends, even my former boss at Meridian Publishing. But I had made it clear that I had nothing to say to her. Some betrayals were too profound for forgiveness, at least not the kind of cheap forgiveness that pretended nothing had happened. Maybe someday I would be able to have a conversation with my mother, but not today. Not yet. Maybe not ever, and I was learning to be okay with that possibility. What about Nathaniel? His attorney contacted mine last month. Apparently he's in therapy and wants to make amends. I laughed, but there was no bitterness in it anymore. I told my lawyer to inform him that the best amends he could make would be to leave me alone forever. After the call ended, I sat in my garden with a cup of coffee and my latest manuscript, a memoir by a woman who had rebuilt her life after discovering her husband's 20-year affair. The parallels to my own story weren't lost on me, but I had learned to find strength in other people's survival stories rather than pain in their betrayals. My doorbell rang, interrupting my reading. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I found a delivery man holding a massive bouquet of wildflowers, the kind I had wanted for my wedding bouquet instead of my mother's choice of roses and peonies. The card was simple: for choosing yourself, from someone who understands. A friend. No signature, no return address, but I didn't need one. Over the past months, I had connected with dozens of women who had found the courage to leave toxic relationships, to speak truth to power, to choose their own happiness over other people's comfort. We were a sisterhood of survivors, and we looked out for each other. I arranged the wildflowers in a crystal vase and placed them on my kitchen table, where their natural, unstructured beauty brightened the entire room. Then I returned to my garden, to my manuscript, to the life I was building one deliberate choice at a time. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in the Meridian Hotel's grand ballroom, looking out at an audience of 300 faces, writers, publishers, readers, and advocates who had gathered for the National Women's Literature Conference. The nameplate in front of me read, Celeste Darren, Keynote Speaker, The Power of Authentic Voice. A year ago, I began, my voice carrying easily through the sound system. I stood at an altar in front of 200 people and made a choice that changed everything. Not the choice everyone expected me to make, but the choice that honored who I really am. In the audience, I could see women nodding, leaning forward in their seats. My story had become a touchstone for many, not because of the drama or the revenge, but because of the deeper truth it represented. We're taught from childhood that keeping the peace is more important than keeping our dignity, I continued. That being nice is more valuable than being honest, that other people's comfort matters more than our own truth. I paused, thinking of that morning in the hotel room when I had looked at myself in the mirror and decided to become someone new. But here's what I learned. When you choose truth over comfort, when you choose yourself over people who have chosen to betray you, you don't just change your own life. You give permission to everyone watching to do the same. The applause was warm and sustained, but more importantly, it was genuine. After my speech, dozens of women approached me to share their own stories of choosing courage over silence, authenticity over approval, themselves over systems designed to keep them quiet and compliant. Late that night, I sat in my hotel room with a glass of wine, scrolling through messages from women who had watched my conference speech online. Their words were variations on the same theme. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Thank you for choosing truth. Thank you for refusing to be silent. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Watched your speech online. Mom would be proud. I stared at the message for a long time. He meant my grandmother, of course, the woman whose veil I had worn on my non-wedding day, who had taught me that strength could look like grace, and that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable someone else's cruelty. But part of me wondered if he also meant Diana. If somewhere in Baltimore, living with the consequences of her choices, my mother had watched her daughter speak about courage and felt something like pride mixed in with her regret. I would probably never know, and I was okay with that. Outside my hotel window, New York City sparkled like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Somewhere in that maze of lights were millions of people making choices, some brave, some cowardly, some that would change everything and others that would maintain the status quo for another day, another year, another lifetime. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to all of them, but especially to the ones who would choose themselves when the world told them to choose silence. The ones who would speak truth when speaking lies would be easier. The ones who would walk away from beautiful prisons disguised as happily ever after. Here's to the ones who choose freedom, I thought. Even when freedom looks like standing alone at an altar, telling the truth to people who would rather believe the lie. I finished my wine, closed my laptop, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, I would fly back to my life in New York, my job, my apartment, my garden of wildflowers. The life I had built not on someone else's foundation, but on my own unshakable truth. And if that wasn't a happily ever after, it was something even better, a beginning that belonged entirely to me. 2 years after the wedding that never was, I received an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from a small Vermont weekly, with a simple headline, "Local pastor officiates first wedding since arriving in Green Mountain community." The accompanying photo showed my father in his clerical robes, smiling genuinely for the first time in years, standing between a young couple who looked at each other with the kind of pure joy I had once thought I felt for Nathaniel. Dad looked peaceful, content, like a man who had found his way back to his true calling after losing his way in the wilderness of other people's expectations. There was no note with the clipping, but none was needed. It was my father's way of telling me that he was not just surviving, but thriving. That choosing truth over comfort had been the right decision for both of us, even when it felt like we were destroying everything we had ever known. I kept the clipping in my jewelry box, next to the engagement ring I had never returned. Not because I wanted to remember Nathaniel or the life we had planned together, but because I wanted to remember the woman who had been brave enough to walk away from it all. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had made different choices, if I had confronted them privately, if I had tried to work through the betrayal behind closed doors, if I had chosen the path of least resistance and married Nathaniel anyway, pretending I didn't know about his affair with my mother. I imagine I would have become one of those women who smile too brightly at dinner parties, who drink a little too much wine to numb the pain of living a lie, who spend their lives wondering what might have been if they had been brave enough to choose themselves. Instead, I chose differently. I chose truth, even when truth was ugly and complicated and destroyed everything I thought I wanted. I chose dignity, even when dignity meant standing alone. I chose myself, even when choosing myself meant disappointing everyone who expected me to be smaller, quieter, more accommodating. And in choosing myself, I discovered something remarkable. I was worth choosing. The wedding that never happened became the beginning of everything that mattered. Not because revenge is sweet, though I won't lie and say there wasn't satisfaction in watching their carefully constructed lies crumble in front of everyone who mattered to them, but because speaking truth, no matter how painful, is the only way to live authentically. 3 years later, I published my first book, The Woman Who Said No, a memoir. It became a bestseller, not because people were hungry for scandal, but because people were hungry for permission to choose themselves. The book tour took me to 50 cities, where I met thousands of women who had their own stories of betrayal, manipulation, and the courage to walk away from situations that were slowly killing their spirits. I learned that my story wasn't unique. It was universal. We all have moments where we must choose between comfort and truth, between other people's expectations and our own integrity, between the life we planned and the life we deserve. The difference is whether we have the courage to choose ourselves when the moment comes. Some mornings, I wake up in my New York apartment and think about the life I didn't live. The suburban house Nathaniel and I would have bought, the children we might have had, the dinner parties where I would have smiled and played the perfect wife, while my husband continued his affair with my mother in secret. I think about the woman I would have become, bitter, suspicious, slowly eroding from the inside out as I tried to maintain a facade of happiness built on a foundation of lies. And then I get up, make coffee, and look out at my city. This loud, chaotic, beautiful place where I am exactly who I choose to be, where my truth matters more than anyone else's comfort, where I am accountable only to myself and the values I choose to live by. This is what freedom looks like. Messy, sometimes lonely, but utterly authentic. This is what choosing yourself gets you. A life that belongs entirely to you. And on my worst days, when the loneliness feels overwhelming, or when I wonder if I was too harsh, too unforgiving, too dramatic in my response to their betrayal, I remember that moment at the altar when I looked out at 200 faces and chose truth over silence. I remember the women who have thanked me for showing them it was possible to walk away from beautiful prisons. I remember my father, starting over at 60 in Vermont, officiating weddings between people who actually love each other. I remember that sometimes the greatest act of love, for yourself and for everyone around you, is refusing to participate in a lie, no matter how pretty that lie might look to the outside world. So yes, I destroyed my wedding day. I ruined my mother's reputation. I ended Nathaniel's career. I shattered my father's world and forced him to rebuild from nothing. But I also saved us all from a lifetime of living a lie. And if that's not worth celebrating, I don't know what is. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's liberation. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is choose herself when everyone else expects her to choose silence. And sometimes the best happily ever after isn't the one you planned, but the one you create when you finally learn to value your own truth above everyone else's comfort. The woman who walked down that aisle in her ivory silk dress, trembling with betrayal and rage, is gone forever. In her place stands someone stronger, someone who knows her own worth, someone who would rather stand alone in truth than sit surrounded by lies. That woman, the one who chose herself, is someone I'm proud to be. And that, I think, is the real happy ending. Thank you so much for watching this incredible story of betrayal, courage, and ultimate triumph. If Celeste's journey inspired you, please let us know in the comments below. We love hearing how these stories impact your own lives. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing tales of people who refuse to stay silent in the face of betrayal. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose yourself, even when everyone else expects you to choose silence. Until next time, keep choosing truth over comfort, and yourself over anyone who doesn't value the incredible person you are.